Welcome to Follow Up Boss Office Hours. We're going to focus on @mentions today. We're going to dive in a minute and cover what those are. But first and foremost, I'd like to welcome Caroline Becker. What's up, Caroline?
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm super excited to talk about mentions today. I think someone commented in the Facebook group, but this is like one of our favorite features that we use internally at Follow Up Boss. We love the mentions, so this is going to be a great topic to cover.
Definitely. I know I'm really excited about them too. I mean, it's such a simple thing, but it really is a great feature to really kind of collaborate, keep history inside the records, all those things. Do you recall, Caroline, when they were released? Like, I know they've been out for a while, but they weren't an original
Yeah,
feature.
that's a great question. So I think they've probably been around for a few years, but in that time we've kind of expanded them.
Right.
So originally you could just like mention one person. Now we can mention teams, we can mention ponds, and we've also built in the ability to mention someone in a conversation thread. So they've kind of grown like throughout the last few years as well.
Perfect. So yeah, cool. So we'll talk through, a little bit what they are, and then obviously we'll go to some screen share and dive in a little bit. But basically it's the idea that inside the system, in a few different places, I think most notably we'll start in the contact profile. If you use the @ symbol, like in a lot of different tools, and you start to type somebody's name or a team or something there, it's going to first pull up the options you have to select, and then you can continue to type a note, something like, hey, this guy was on our site yesterday, maybe you should reach out, or hey, we got this guy's pre-approval letter, or these guys are under contract now, the TC team is taken over. There's a lot of different use cases.
Mhm.
um what do you guys internally, I mean, I know this isn't super relevant to everybody around, but you guys kind of like, hey, can somebody call this guy, or how do you guys use it?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Yeah, like high level, like you're saying, like this like concept of app mentioning, we can find it through a lot of different apps. And, the idea is to bring attention to something that someone wouldn't otherwise see, or like something that's like very high priority that they should action. So like internally, we use it a lot. So we have, like our support team, for example, or our product team. We like to keep our customer success managers in the loop when we have conversations with, people that they work with. So like very oftentimes it'll be like, hey, this person, called into support. This is what we chatted about. Like next time you guys have a check-in, double check how that's going. And as you mentioned, like that's lives in the timeline forever. And so like they're always going to like have that context, like when that check-in does come around, or if they want to like reach out sooner. So we use it a lot for that. And we also use it to even kind of have conversations. So like Jen may mention me in like something in a profile, and I can even respond to her within that same one. So we do a little bit of like a conversation approach to the app mentionings, like internally.
Great. I love that. Yeah. Do you want to go ahead and share your screen just so we can I mean, I think most people
Yeah.
probably are somewhat familiar with what they do, or how they work, but I think we should demonstrate that, and then we can get into some specific use cases and kind of ideas that might apply to
Yeah.
more of Follow Boss users.
Definitely. So I just have a profile pulled up here and I have this, I'm under create a note. So this is like we were saying, probably like the most common place where you can do this. You can also do this on the app too. So just so you know that this is across the app as well. But when you do the @ symbol, as Lee was saying, you're going to start to see some options of things you can mention. So the first group here is the ponds, and this is a test account, but so you can mention an entire pond. This is going to be a team. And then these are all of the individuals. So you can continue to type in here, and then just select from that drop down. You can even click like the enter button to choose that person as well. And excuse me, you can see that we also are kind of telling you what's going to happen. So in this case, Lee will be notified. And then I can continue on with my note as you were saying, like, just spoke with this person, what have you. And then you just choose create a note. And then that's going to send off those notifications to Lee. And I guess we could chat a little bit about like what those notifications look like.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, so there are notification settings per person. So Lee will be notified of my note based on his settings, but we have a handful of settings available. So you can get a desktop notification, which would be like that push notification that comes from your browser. You can get an app notification. So you would get that push notification from the Follow Up Boss app. And then you can also get a email notification, and that's really helpful because the email notification is going to have this person's information. So it's going to have their name, their phone number, their email, and the context of the note, along with a link to the profile. So that way, when Lee receives this, he can either action it right from the email or click into this profile.
That's one of my
And
favorite things. There's a big
yeah,
blue button that says open lead or go to this lead or something. It makes it super easy. So if again, you're using this in some case as far as, hey, you should call this guy, or hey, it's their birthday, or hey, this guy was back on the site yesterday. It makes it super easy for an agent to hit that button, come right to this lead, make a call, send an email template, do whatever they do. And I know I harp on this a lot, but potentially having an internal policy around like what to do. Like, should you mention the person who sent the note and say, hey, done? Just having some sort of kind of best practice around, what happens when you mention somebody, what should the follow-up be, just to confirm that it happens.
yeah, that's like such a good point. And that's really like what I was chatting about earlier with like internally. Because then what we could do is like, let's say this is Lee responding, he could edit this and he could say, Caroline, I guess I'm Caroline, but you could
I'll say
say,
you can't. I know, I was actually going to mention that earlier. I was like, you
yeah,
can't
you
mention
can't
yourself
mention yourself.
technically.
But yeah, you can just kind of continue on in this thread.
I love that. I
So
actually didn't even know that. I mean, I knew you could edit it, but I didn't think to edit the same note so it's kind of in line instead of an additional note further up.
exactly, especially if things happen between this note and when someone gets to it. Again, it's like bringing that context back. And yeah, as you were saying, like in the email, we jump right to the profile from that notification. And the same goes for all of our other notifications. So the notification will also show in like the notification center. And if you click on it, we're going right to this profile. And I think like what's super important about that is it just like skyrockets your efficiency. Like imagine if I just texted you, Lee, and I said, hey, I just talked to Joey. Like, can you review my call? Like you don't have any of
Right.
that context
Like,
there.
who
It's
was
kind
it?
of
What was the name? What's the email again? How do I find
right.
it? It becomes
It
a
puts all the onus on you to get
right.
there. And I think that's where people end up kind of like dropping the ball. But with these, you're going right to the profile. And again, you just have all of this context. So, it becomes a lot more like self-serve, and you can work much more efficiently asynchronously
Yeah.
when you're doing this, as opposed to just kind of these one-off messages or texts or that kind of thing.
Yeah. And I do want to say, I mean, obviously if you're using something like a Slack or a Basecamp or a GroupMe or something, like this isn't as in depth as that, because you can have separate channels and you can build it out and get all fancy. But again, this is tied more to the actual leads themselves. In my opinion, Slack is a great way to remind about a meeting, or hey, I have a question, who can answer me quickly. But this is such a great way to really keep people in the system. And this actually takes us right beautifully to a question Nicole just asked that I wanted to cover next anyway. Nicole asked, how can you ensure that agents all have email notification on? I think the short version is, Caroline, I believe it's on by default. Is that correct?
Yep, that's right. So that it's on by default. I'll just jump over to this
Yeah. And
page.
then if you click on the gear there under notifications,
Mhm.
that's where you can check, but it should be on by default. So unless they have turned it off, but again, it goes back to having that policy, right? Like, hey, we want you to have your email notifications on.
Yeah, exactly. They should all be on by default, which would be all of the different notifications we just described. So that notification center, that's the browser notification, the mobile push notification, and the email notification. So anywhere you're seeing app mention, those should all be on. And I think this is a case for, people do like to customize their notifications and they don't want to be overburdened with notifications.
Right.
But I think this is a case for this to be, a type of event that notifies you kind of across the board.
Yeah. No, this is a high priority thing. Like if you don't
Exactly.
necessarily need to be notified if, something else happens or if a task is assigned, I get that on some level.
Mhm.
But these, generally speaking, certainly would be high priority things in my mind if you're doing it right.
Yeah, exactly. You're doing it right. Um, cool. Yeah. And so we kind of covered the lead profile notifications, and maybe we can circle back to some use cases there.
Yeah.
But I did also want to show you guys where else you can do these app mentions, and that would be within your team inbox conversations. So it's a slightly different use case, but kind of the same concept. So here in the team inbox, if you open up a conversation, you're going to see this like yellow banner kind of at the bottom. And this is where you can add notes that are actually part of this conversation. And this is really useful in the team inbox because the idea around the team inbox is that you are collaborating around these conversations.
Yeah.
So here for any of these, whether it's a text, an email, a call, a missed call, voicemail, you can do the at symbol, and then you're going to be able to mention the people that are part of this inbox. So you'll notice this is a much smaller list than what we were seeing on the lead profile. But this is going to be the people that are a part of this inbox. So if you're someone who's like working the inbox and delegating conversations, this is a really good use of that. Or maybe someone says like, hey, Lee, call me. And I can say, Lee, I actually did speak with this person the other day. But same thing, they're going to be notified of this. And this is going to then, live in this kind of conversation thread. So I think this is also a good opportunity for like any coaching tips, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And I just want to reiterate, you said this, but I just want to make sure it's really clear to people in the inboxes, these are specific to this conversation. Typically, this may be a new inbound call because if it's a call from someone existing in the database, it's most likely, depending on a few things, going to be routed to whoever it's assigned to. So these typically are for a new inbound call for someone not in Follow Boss. So let's just say it was somebody reaching out who was like, hey, I need to talk to your marketing person. This is a great way that you can mention the marketing person and just say, hey, it'll bring them right here so they can listen to a voicemail or see any conversation history that has been. And you can assign conversations to people, but this is also just a really great way to add, like Caroline said, a little context to like, hey, this guy called, they're looking for you. It might be a solicitation, but I just want to make sure that you got it. Like, I don't care if you
Mhm.
call it back or not. I did my job by getting it to you.
Yeah. And to the point, like even if you are assigning conversations, I don't think we have one assigned here, but like let's say Lee did have a conversation assigned, but again, I'm the one monitoring this inbox or
Right. If
working
you were
this
an
inbox with
ISA or
him.
if you were responsible for all the calls.
Yeah, exactly. Like I could still see this as assigned. I know it's assigned to Lee. I'm not going to reassign it to him, but I'd be like, hey Lee, you haven't called this person back. They called October 28th. Like what happened? I mean,
What's
this is
wrong?
obviously a bad example, but that's like another a great way to use it is to, again, bring that attention back to this thing that like needs to be addressed by someone in particular.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I think did you have anything else here, Caroline? I wanted to kind of get into, I think, some specific use
Yeah.
cases. I know part of the blessing and the curse of all these things is that there's a lot you can do with it, but then you have to kind of decide what you want to do with it or what things would be valuable for your particular business and business model. I think one of the obvious biggest things is just reminding agents to call higher priority leads or, hey, this smart list is getting full. Obviously, you can't mention a smart list, but you could mention the first person in it and say, hey, this person and 5 others are in your hot, call today smart list.
Hmm.
Or something like a YLOPA Y priority alert, like, hey, this guy was on the site last night. It's been, it's 11 o'clock. You haven't called him yet. And I love the pond. I've actually never really used the pond
Hmm.
at mention, but my assumption is obviously it's gonna notify everyone in that pond, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I love that you're kind of like tying this in with SmartList because I think that's a really good use case. Like, let's say you see someone pop up on the recently active list or something and no one's called them. You can jump in there and that's where you can, at mention the pond or maybe at mention the ISA team and
Right.
say, hey, like,
Just first
you
available.
guys.
Somebody call this guy.
Exactly. And like maybe they were notified because there was a new inquiry, but no one jumped on it. So that's like a really great use case is to say like, hey, like just bringing our attention back here, like someone give this person a call. And
Right.
what's nice with both of those things, the pond and the team, we have what's called presence on the pages. So like if Lee jumps into this page, I can see that he's on here too. So there's a
Right.
little bit of a collaborative aspect there as well.
Yeah, that's super cool. And one thing that just occurred to me, we kind of skipped past is when you mention somebody here, and I appreciate you guys dropping questions. We'll get to your questions. Keep dropping the Q&A. One thing that I kind of skipped right past was typically when you mention somebody, like, especially, I don't know how it works with the pond, to be honest with you, it will add them as a collaborator as well. So if you're saying, hey, lender, you need to call this guy, and they're not already the lender on the system, it'll at least add them as a collaborator, or
Mhm.
same with an ISA. But when you do an mention, you can see right there at the bottom, it says will be notified and added as a collaborator. But obviously, if you're mentioning somebody, they need to see the lead. So if you're mentioning
Exactly.
it and they don't have access to it, I think that's obviously a big part of why it adds them as a collaborator, so they can actually see it and get to it.
Yes. No, that's a great point. And, maybe they're not like part of, they're not the assigned person. They're not, maybe part of the pond. This is a really quick way to get them added, because like you said, if you are mentioning them, you obviously want them to see this person in some capacity. So that will add them as a collaborator, which again, that shows down here just for people who aren't aware of like that collaborator feature.
Yeah. Yeah, so I want to make sure we mention that. This is also a great example, Caroline. I love the lender question just because, like, what a great way. I mean, the example I did actually yesterday on a webinar I was on was I mentioned you and was like, hey, this guy's pre-approved. But what a much better way to use it within the system. It's in the history. Hey, this guy's pre-approved to 350. You should call him. He's ready to go find places. Um, it's just kind of a step
Mhm.
up from any other, like you said, Caroline, if you just text somebody or Slack somebody like, hey, call this guy, like, which guy? Oh, where is he? Okay. Oh, here it is. But this
Yeah.
is just such a cleaner way
Yeah,
to
there's
do
no
this.
context there, but, like, with
Right.
this, you can see, oh, like, what are they kind of looking at? When did we talk to them last? Like, how did that
Right.
phone call go? Maybe you listen to that phone call and get an idea of, like, their kind of persona, if you will, and,
Right.
you can just have a much better conversation that way.
Yeah, I love that. Nicole has a question about how do you add mentions, and I think my assumption is maybe that you potentially don't have any ponds or something set up. Nicole, you're welcome to post back in the Q&A. Um,
Or I guess, maybe we should have mentioned this in the beginning. If you are the only person on your team, if you're like a solo account,
right.
you
She
won't
definitely has
have
team
anyone to
members.
mention. Yeah.
I know she has team members from the prior
Okay.
question, but I think she says I just see team members now, so I'm wondering if maybe there aren't ponds or aren't teams. You would only have teams if you're a platform user, which is typically 20-ish users or more. It includes up to 30, I believe.
Yeah, I think five or more, you should be on that. No, you're right, you're right.
For
It's
platform.
yeah, for
Because
platform, you're
platform builds in the
30.
team functionality where you can have multiple people in a team.
Mhm.
So Nicole, I would say if you have an account manager, mouse over the question mark, um, and see who your account manager is, or just reach out to support. That might just be a specific thing to your account that's a little hard to do that. So happy to dig a little more in on that, but it's a little hard to give an answer without a little more context. Um, okay,
And
perfect. Yeah, she said she has an admin and 4 agents. So you should see all those. Beyond that, you would have ponds or teams that could be your other choices. And then Christopher has a great question. It says, does a lender have to be do they have to have a seat to be
mention.
mentioned? Like they have to be a user to be mentioned is the short answer.
Yeah, exactly. So the people that can be at mentioned are going to be the people that you're seeing on your team's page. So you would need to actually have your lender, in this case, Larry Lender, as a user in order for him to show up in that when you click that at sign.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Cool. And yes, we do record all these and we'll send them out to everybody. They stream live to the Follow Boss Facebook group, but I also send out the recording to everybody. So wanted to tackle that. Now, one thing, I don't want to get too crazy with this because it's not an app mention, but one way if your lender's not in here, because one of the things Christopher said is that his lender has his own Follow Boss account. I know sometimes for compliance, there's different things where they can't always be in your account per se. One of the cool things you can do though, and I hate to get off topic with this, but you can do a group text for that potentially, or a text within Follow Boss. So that's a way you could text them inside of Follow Boss if they aren't a user. Again, I know I'm getting a little off topic, but you could still, that still keeps it inside the history here. You could even do a group text if you're trying to intro the lender to a consumer. So that you can all do without them being a user. But to do a true at mention, they would need to be a user where Caroline was under admin team.
And that way they have, basically access to that link that we're going to end up sending them. So.
Yep, exactly. So a couple more use cases we had. I mean, we covered some of this, but I just want to be sure we're diligent here. Other internal staff things. I mentioned a few of these earlier, but things like, hey, we got the binding contract, TC's taking over now, just to notify the agent that like, hey, we're good. If you run a model where the agent doesn't have a lot of responsibility once you go under contract, just a great thing, again, to put in the history, notify the agent, we got all the docs we need, we're moving forward, or hey, we need this additional doc. Great, obviously, for ISAs, because the agent could even at mention the ISA and say, hey, I've tried this guy 5 times, I can't get him. Can you take it on and see if you can convert it and give it back to me? So obviously it goes both ways. But even an at mention for, hey, we've updated this to closed and we're sending a closing gift, like all of those things. It's just so awesome to have them tied to the contact record here than to send an email or a Slack message.
Yeah, exactly. And like they're just going to be in the right place. I like that you mentioned like the documents piece earlier. Like, so if we're mentioning them, asking them for a document, they're going to upload it right here under files.
But
so
that doesn't notify them. So you could say, hey, so and
Exactly.
so, I added the pre-approval letter, or I added the closing documents.
Yeah, exactly. And check it out and even, use the pointing emoji to the right or whatever. So it's right there.
Nice. I like that. One other thing too is, this is another great way. I know a lot of people that do this. They'll actually tag, let's just say you had a phone call, if you're using the call recording and you just had a call and you either want some advice on it or it was a weird call and you want somebody else to hear it, you can come in here and do an at mention and say, hey, mentor or team owner or whoever, like check out minute 3 of this phone call. It's kind of weird, or I'm not sure what they meant, or how do you think I handled this for like coaching and training? Yeah, that's great. I love the emoji there.
Yeah, I think that's like I see that probably used, one of the most often used, reasons for that is for these coaching purposes. Because yeah, like sometimes you just need a second set of eyes on that, whether that's a call, maybe it's even like an email that was a little bit odd, or, and on the reverse, instead of like asking for coaching, if you're the one listening to these calls, that's a great place to leave those notes as well.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think in some sense too, if any of you guys have other use cases, feel free to drop in the chat or Q&A. I think that, the good thing is there's no really limit or specific thing you have to do with this. But I'm sure people have other cool uses that they're doing that we don't even know about. But
Yeah, definitely.
yeah,
We always learn from you guys.
totally. I know for sure. I really am a big fan of this just because it's so simple. We talked about doing an office hours on it. I think Caroline, our first thought was like, it's such a little, like, it's not, it's just one thing. Like, we're gonna do a whole office hours on it. And it's like, yeah, because there's so many uses. We don't need it to be complicated, right? We
Right.
just want it to be useful.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, it's surprising. There's a lot of people that don't use it. And I think that that's like definitely a missed opportunity to, make some of this like just so much more streamlined and kind of staying true to the follow-up boss ethos of everything being in one place. I think it's super important. So I'm really glad that we got to dive in on this. And yeah, like you said, I'd love to hear what other people are doing with this and how they're finding it useful because we love to share that, amongst the community.
Definitely. Yeah. And like you guys, our team uses this absolutely daily. I mean, we are
Mhm.
constantly like, hey, I'll call this guy, or hey, I'm on a call right now. Can you handle this one? Or hey, this guy just reached out with a question. I'm not sure the answer. Can you get it? Like, it's really a great tool. I think it's like a lot of things in Follow Up Boss. Once you try it a couple of times, you're like, oh, this is great. How did I live before I had this? So I would encourage,
Yeah.
if you're not doing this at all, I would encourage you to just try it today. Again, you can't at mention yourself because that wouldn't really do anything, but just try it on, try one today, just paying an age on your team. And this will be a good way to take us out. I want to encourage people. It's such a good thing when you're running a team, and this is such a hard business, or a brokerage. It's such a hard business. Just use this to catch somebody doing something right. Just say, hey, great job. You called this guy within 3 minutes of them coming in. Great job. Like, that should have been the first thing on our list, Caroline. Like,
Yeah.
catch somebody doing something good and
I love that.
tell them good job. But I would challenge anybody on, especially if you're not using this, to give it a shot. And Caroline, thanks as always. Always fun doing these with you.
Of course. Thanks for having me, and thanks for everyone for joining us.
Awesome. Love it. Yeah, Sophia just dropped a great note too. Yeah, so they're using this internally. I love that. So appreciate you guys tuning in, and we'll see you again soon.
See ya.